Christianity that begins with Constantine. So it is the official institutionalized church that basically provides the spiritual justification for empires, that provides for the justification of the genocide of indigenous people, that provides for the justification of slavery. That is Christendom, okay? The church is a group of people who come together trying to figure out how to live out the gospel message of Jesus Christ. It could be in a building, or it could be in the wilderness. It could be anywhere. It doesn't have to be an official First Baptist Church of Dallas, Texas. It could literally be a group of people just getting together around a kitchen table trying to live out this thing called faith. So that's the church. Now, sometimes that happens in a building, and that's great when it does, but not always. But Christendom, think of institutionalization of a spiritualizing of the evils of empire and neoliberalism and everything else. Yeah. Yes. Definitely. The question is, what do I think are the fears of the people who create a white Jesus? Basically, this white Jesus, well, let me take a step back. This nation was built on this white Jesus. It was this white Jesus who gave us the spirituality of manifest destiny, that God has called us white people to take over this land, and there was the spiritual element with manifest destiny that once the land was taken over, the second coming would occur. You know, there was this whole idea. This idea of a white Jesus basically justifies my place in society and my place in the world. Okay. So when someone like myself comes around and says, this white Jesus is so interwoven with structures of oppression in this country that I have to reject it, I am also rejecting the very structures that this white Jesus supports. So there is, number one, that fear of revolution, that fear that the spiritualization that justify the structures that provide privilege might be overturned. So you hold on to it even tighter. Okay. I find that, first of all, any group of religious people who appoint messiahs is dangerous. The liberal or the left, don't care which. All politicians fall way short of the glory of God. So I am dumbfounded that a group of people who believe in dispensationalism of the rising of an antichrist is embracing someone whose very life is anti to everything Jesus taught, as touched by God, as opposed to madness. And again, it's not just Trump. Is any politician that the church makes into messiahs. But Trump, I think, becomes the last hope of this white Christianity. So that to attack Trump is to attack Christianity and God's chosen. So there's something very diabolical occurring in spiritual terms. And again, I don't care if you're for Trump or against Trump, that doesn't matter to me. I'm talking about when the gospel is used to justify political structures, whether it be to justify the Inquisition, whether it be to justify the early Puritans, whether it be to justify any religious structure. So yeah, I think there's a lot of fear going on. I mean, the greatest fear is that within our lifetime, within the next 15 years, by 2030, by 2030, white people will be the minority in this country. I mean, in some cities, like I guess Phoenix, that's already the case. But I mean, seriously, that is scary when you already assume that this whole structure is designed for your privilege and your benefit, that you will no longer be the majority, So I'm wondering if this current administration is either the last gasp or a new resurgence. And I don't know yet. Either it's like the last attempt to impose white supremacy, or a resurgence of a white supremacy that will create an apartheid system that will protect the power of the minority. Wow. And I'm not quite sure which the two we are at yet. Time will tell. Yeah, I think you were next, and then we'll go back here.
This morning you've talked about salvation. You've said that word a number of times, and I'm wondering what you mean when you talk about salvation. Saved from what or for what?
Yeah, thank you. The Greek word for salvation is the same word from where we get the word liberation. And most liberative thinkers use both words interchangeably. So when I say salvation, I'm not talking so much about me getting into heaven. I mean, that's not important to me. What I'm talking about, liberation from sin. So now you have to ask, well, what do you mean by sin? I'm talking about liberation from your sin. In other words, the sin of white supremacy, the sin of neoliberalism. Those are the social structural sins that are creating poverty and racism and homophobia and patriarchy. So when I say salvation is salvation from sin of racism and patriarchy, and so when I talk, and I think I'm being more biblical because, like I said, salvation is liberation. So I'm talking about how do we liberate us from these sins of society, so that we can have a more abundant life now. How about when I die and go to heaven? I don't know. I really don't care. Don't get me wrong. I already picked out my mansion when I get there, so I'm cool. But here's what I try to tell my students. Do you do this justice stuff because you think you're going to get into heaven? If there is no heaven, will you still be doing this justice stuff? Because if you're doing it thinking you're going to get something out of it, there's something wrong. So rather there be a heaven or not, I don't know. When I die, I'll find out. And if there's not, I won't know because my conscience won't be there. So I'm less concerned about that. I'm more concerned about what salvation looks in the here and now, more so than in the here and after. Yeah, thank you. I said you were next, and then 1, 2, 3. Okay. Because I'm going to forget who was.
I guess I always have a question when we talk about white supremacy, because white supremacy does not benefit poor white people. It does not benefit middle-class white people. It only benefits wealthy white people and wealthy people of either color. And I mean, how do we as Christians, as liberal Christians, for want of a better term, how do we decouple that idea that all white people are in this together and we're together against the poor black, poor Hispanic, what have you? Because in my mind, what's end up happening is the ruling elite is using race to divide people who have more in common with each other than they do with the ruling class.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I agree with you 100. Well, I agree with you 89%. So I will share the part I don't disagree with, and I will reinforce the part that I totally agree with. Absolutely, race is used by the 1% to keep divided people who have more in common. And I make that same argument in a book I wrote called Burying White Privilege, in where I make that same argument, that there's no question about it, that what occurs is that by claiming skin folk, it allows one. Well, take a step back. So let me put it this way. Here's the part where I probably would disagree with you, and that is, number one, very obvious. If you get stopped by a cop and a black person gets stopped by a cop, your white privilege kicks in very quickly. So, and we all know that. So that's just a side note. But here's what I think is the real problem. We have been taught since childhood, especially white people have been taught since childhood, to dream upward and to blame downward. That is, the dream of whiteness, no matter how poor you are, and no matter how economically oppressed you are, is to hit the lottery and to one day be among the 1%. The whole idea of social mobility, of moving upward. But you see, we're no longer a socially mobile country. Economically, you'll probably, whatever economic class you were born in, you will die, your children will live in a lower economic class, or you will probably die in a lower economic class, because the vast majority of the wealth, as we know, is going upward to that 1%. But we're still dreaming upward. So what ends up happening is that we have to blame someone. We don't want to blame the people to whom the wealth is going because we're hoping ourselves to make it up there. Instead, we blame those damn Mexicans who are taking our job. We blame downward. We dream upward, we blame downward. And I think that's what you're trying to get at. That's the lie that most white people have been taught, that somehow the reason they're not making it to the 1% is because they're being held back by welfare queens and by bucks using food stamps and by Mexicans stealing their jobs and all the other propaganda that's used to help me understand why I can't make it in this country. Because if it wasn't for them, I'll be much better off economically. So when I'm talking about white privilege, I am talking about a false consciousness that even poor whites are embracing. Okay? And it's that false consciousness that then makes them the most aggressive in defending that white privilege. We have to remember, during the Civil War, the vast majority of Southerners who fought never owned slaves. Okay? They were fighting because they were hoping to one day own slaves, and they didn't want to lose that possibility. So it's not an issue of, yes, they were poor dirt farmers. They were probably economically at the same level as slaves, although they didn't face the brutalities. But those who were hired as overseers were more brutal to the slaves than the masters themselves in many respects. They're the ones that were whipping the slaves, not the masters. So you have this thing that many times, because I want, but it's hard work, especially when you look at the demographics as to who voted for this current administration, which is deadly to communities of color. It's literally killing us. Yeah. So I hope that, I hope that nuance it a little bit more. Okay. Yes.
Hello. You say I understand you were a Southern Baptist?
Yeah.
When did you leave the Southern Baptists?
Oh, I didn't leave them. I'm a good old Southern Baptist preacher, and here's why. First of all, somebody was asking me this earlier. The reason I became a Southern Baptist was for very deep theological reasons. The girl I wanted to go out with would only go out with me if I went to church with her on Sundays. Mm-hmm. And she happened to be a Southern Baptist, so that's why I became a Southern Baptist. I became a preacher at Southern Baptist Church. The only reason I remain Southern Baptist is to bug the hell out of them. because I get to write in a lot of Southern Baptist journals. And, you know, and for example, I was on a TV interview with the Family Council, a little debate, on LGBT civil rights. And I made sure that under my name it said Southern Baptist Minister. Again, and I'll talk more about this screwing with the systems in the second half of the section.
Because the Southern Baptists, I learned, endorsed slavery.
Yeah.
And they passed a resolution in 1995 apologizing for their endorsement of that practice.
Yeah, and I think it was a very empty apology, and where they just got somebody to stand up and accept the apology, which, again, words are cheap. Nothing was done to begin rectifying those problems. But again, as I'm trying to say, I'm also a Roman Catholic, and I'm also Santero. That's the Afro-Cuban religion of